Marcus's urgency that made my blood freeze. It was what I'd just discovered behind the false wall in my mother-in-law's basement. My hands were still trembling from prying away the loose panel, still dirty from clawing at the decades-old wood. That had hidden something unthinkable. "Elena, did you hear me?" Marcus's voice carried down the basement stairs, sharp with an edge I'd never heard before. "We need to go. Right now. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." I stared at the photographs scattered across the concrete floor, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Pictures of young women. Dozens of them. All with the same terrified expression, the same concrete backdrop, the same basement where I now stood. The dates on the back went back 30 years. My mother-in-law, sweet Dorothy Morrison with her knitting circles and church committees, had been feeding me tea and cookies for 3 years while harboring the darkest secret imaginable. "Elena." Marcus's footsteps thundered down the wooden stairs. "What are you?" His voice cut off abruptly when he saw me crouched among the photographs, my wedding dress from yesterday still pristine white against the horror surrounding me. We'd come here for our honeymoon night tradition, the quaint family custom where newlyweds spent their first night in the ancestral home. Dorothy had insisted, practically glowing as she handed me the key to what she called the memory room in the basement. "Every Morrison bride has spent her wedding night down there," she'd said with that grandmotherly smile that now seemed sinister. In retrospect, it's where you truly become part of the family. The memory room. God, how naive I'd been. Marcus stood frozen on the bottom step, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally a terror that matched my own. But there was something else in his expression, something that made my stomach drop even further. "You knew," I whispered, the words barely audible. "Marcus, you knew about this." He shook his head frantically, but his eyes were already calculating, already looking for escape routes. "Elena, I can explain." "Explain what?" I stood up, photographs clutching in my shaking hands. "Explain why your mother has pictures of murdered women hidden in her basement? Explain why you brought me here on our wedding night." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Upstairs, I could hear Dorothy humming as she prepared what she'd called the special tea for newlyweds. The same tea she'd probably given to every woman in these photographs. Marcus took a step toward me, his hands raised in what might have been a placating gesture or something more threatening. "Elena, you don't understand the whole situation. This isn't what it looks like." But I was already backing away, my mind racing through every interaction I'd had with the Morrison family. Marcus's insistence that we get married quickly. Dorothy's strange comments about me being perfect for the tradition. The way Marcus's father had looked at me during the wedding rehearsal, not with warmth, but with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating prey. "How many?" I demanded, my voice stronger now despite the terror coursing through me. "How many women, Marcus?" His face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like the man I thought I'd married yesterday. "Elena, please. It's not. I never wanted this for you. I thought if I could just get you to understand, maybe we could find another way." Another way. As if there were multiple options for dealing with being married into a family of serial killers. I clutched the photographs tighter, evidence of what the Morrison family really was. The women in these pictures, they were all brides, weren't they? They all came down here on their wedding night. Marcus's silence was answer enough. The sound of footsteps upstairs grew closer. Dorothy was making her way to the basement door, probably wondering why her new daughter-in-law was taking so long to appreciate the family tradition. I could hear her singing now, an old lullaby that sounded ominous echoing down into this chamber of horrors. "We have to go," Marcus said again. But now I understood his urgency wasn't about protecting me, it was about protecting himself. "Elena, if she finds out she'll what? Kill me like she killed them?" I gestured to the photographs. "Like you both planned to kill me? It wasn't supposed to be you." The words burst out of him in a desperate whisper. "You were supposed to stay upstairs. The tea was supposed to work faster. By the time you came down here, you wouldn't have cared about anything you found." The tea. I remembered setting down the cup after just one sip, distracted by Marcus's nervous energy. Some instinct I couldn't name had warned me not to drink it. Dorothy's footsteps had reached the basement door. Elena, dear? How are you settling in? Down there? I looked at Marcus, this man I'd promised to love and honor just 24 hours ago, and saw a stranger. Worse than a stranger, an accomplice to murder. How long have you been helping her? Since I was 16, he admitted, his voice hollow. It's not. Elena, you have to understand, it's not something you just walk away from. It's family. Family. The word twisted in my mouth like poison. Elena? Dorothy's voice was closer now, her tone shifting from saccharine sweetness to something sharper. Is everything all right down there? Marcus, did you explain the tradition to her properly? I had maybe 30 seconds before she came down the stairs. 30 seconds to decide whether to confront a serial killer or try to escape. Looking at Marcus, I realized I couldn't count on my husband for help. He was part of this nightmare, but there was something else in the photographs I'd noticed, something that gave me a fragment of hope. In several of the pictures, I could see part of a window, small, high up on the basement wall, probably leading to the backyard. It was boarded up now, but the boards looked old, possibly rotted. Elena, Dorothy called again, and I could hear her hand on the door handle. I'm coming down, dear. Don't be frightened. Frightened. As if fear was the problem here. I grabbed as many photographs as I could carry and shoved them into the hidden pocket of my wedding dress, evidence that couldn't be destroyed if I managed to escape. Marcus watched me with growing panic. Please, he whispered. Just play along. Pretend you didn't see anything. Maybe she'll let you live if you become part of the family willingly. The basement door creaked open, and Dorothy's shadow fell across the stairs. She was humming again, that same lullaby, but now I could make out the words, sleep, my darling, sleep so deep, mother's secret we shall keep. I looked at Marcus one last time, this man who had betrayed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. Your family tradition ends tonight. And with that promise burning in my chest, I turned toward the boarded window. Praying I was strong enough to break through wood and desperate enough to survive what came next. Dorothy's footsteps had reached the halfway point on the stairs when I launched myself at the window. The first board splintered under my shoulder, sending shards of rotted wood clattering to the basement floor. 30 years of moisture had made the barriers weak, but not weak enough. I could hear Dorothy's humming growing closer as I threw my full weight against the makeshift barricade again. Elena, what on earth are you doing? Dorothy's voice had lost all pretense of grandmotherly warmth. The tone was sharp, commanding, the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Behind me, Marcus made a strangled sound, half warning, half plea. Mom, she found them. She found the photographs. The humming stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own ragged breathing, the creak of old house settling, and something else, Dorothy's footsteps, no longer casual, moving with predatory purpose down the remaining stairs. The second board gave way with a crack that sounded like thunder in the confined space. Cool night air rushed through the gap, carrying the scent of Dorothy's prize-winning roses and freedom. But the opening was still too small for me to squeeze through, and my wedding dress, this symbol of what should have been the happiest day of my life, was catching on every splinter. Oh, my dear girl, Dorothy's voice was right behind me now. Sickeningly maternal. You've made such a mess. And on your wedding night, too. I spun around, pressing my back against the partially destroyed window. Dorothy stood at the bottom of the stairs, no longer the sweet elderly woman who had welcomed me into her family. This version of her was straight-backed and strong, her gray hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, her cardigan buttoned with military precision. In her hands, she held an ornate silver tea service, the same one she'd used to serve me earlier. The tea wasn't just chamomile, was it? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Dorothy smiled, and it was worse than any scream. Rohypnol. Dear. Just enough to make you compliant. Most brides drink the whole cup, they're so nervous, you see. So eager to please their new family. Her eyes glittered in the basement's harsh fluorescent lighting. But you always were different, weren't you? Marcus told me you barely touched it. Marcus stood frozen between us, his face a map of guilt and terror. Mom, please. We can figure something else out. Figure something else out? Dorothy's laugh was like breaking glass. Marcus, darling, you know better than that. The tradition is sacred. It's what built this family, what made us strong. Your grandmother understood. Your father understood. Even you understand, when you're thinking clearly. She set the tea service down on a nearby workbench with practiced care, never taking her eyes off me. Did you count them, Elena? The photographs? There are 43 in total. 43 young women who thought they were joining a loving family. My stomach lurched. 43 women who had stood where I was standing, wearing white dresses. Carrying hopes for the future. 43 women who had trusted the Morrison family with their lives. Why? The words scraped out of my throat. Why do this? Dorothy began rolling up her sleeves, revealing arms that were surprisingly muscular. For a woman her age. Because weak blood weakens the line, dear. Because some traditions are worth preserving, no matter the cost. Because this family has standards. She moved toward a cabinet I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind hanging pegboard tools. From it, she withdrew items that made my blood turn to ice: rope, plastic sheeting, and something that looked like a modified cattle prod. The first Mrs. Morrison, my mother-in-law, started the tradition in 1962, Dorothy continued conversationally, as if she were sharing a recipe rather than confessing to mass murder. She believed that only the strongest women deserved to carry the Morrison name. The others, well, they served their purpose in other ways. My hand found the window frame behind me, feeling for another loose board. What purpose? Insurance money, for one thing. Life insurance policies taken out just before the wedding. Amazing how many young wives have accidents on their honeymoon. Dorothy's voice carried a sick pride. And then there are the families. Of course. The grieving parents who need someone to blame for their daughter's death. Sometimes that someone pays very well for their silence. Marcus made a sound like a wounded animal. Elena, I wanted to tell you. After we met, I tried to convince Mom to stop. I told her you were different. Different how? Dorothy's voice turned sharp as a blade. Different because she's pretty? Because she makes you laugh? Marcus, you disappoint me. I thought I'd raised you better than to let sentiment cloud your judgment. She was moving closer now, the modified cattle prod humming with electricity. Elena was chosen specifically because she fits our criteria. No living parents, no siblings, minimal social connections. The perfect victim, really. When she disappears, very few people will ask questions. The words hit me like physical blows. They had researched me, stalked me, chosen me not for love but for my isolation. Every moment of my relationship with Marcus had been a lie, every family dinner a performance, every kind gesture from Dorothy a manipulation, but there was something Dorothy didn't know, something I'd kept hidden even from Marcus during our year-long courtship. My isolation wasn't accidental, it was carefully constructed. And I wasn't as helpless as they believed. You made one mistake, I said, my voice gaining strength. You assumed I was weak because I was alone. Dorothy paused, her head tilting like a curious bird. Oh? And what's that supposed to mean? Instead of answering, I slammed my elbow back into the third board. This time, it gave way completely, and I felt the opening widen enough for escape. But I didn't run. Not yet. It means I've been recording our conversation. I pulled my phone from the hidden pocket of my dress, the same pocket where I'd stashed the photographs. Voice-activated recording. Started the moment you came down. Those stairs. The blood drained from Dorothy's face. Marcus stumbled backward as if I'd struck him. I sent a text before we came down here, I continued, the lie flowing smoothly. Told my friend Sarah where we were, what we were doing. She's expecting me to check in by midnight. When I don't. I let the implication hang. It wasn't true. Sarah was backpacking through Europe, completely out of contact. But Dorothy didn't know that. You're lying, Dorothy said, but uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Am I? You said yourself I was different. Did you really think I'd walk into a basement at midnight without taking precautions? I held up the phone, its screen glowing with the active recording app. 43 murders, Dorothy. Insurance fraud. A conspiracy spanning decades. I wonder what the police will make of this recording. Marcus was hyperventilating now, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Elena, please. We can work something out. Mom, she's right. If there's evidence, shut up, Marcus. Dorothy's composure was cracking, revealing something monstrous underneath. She's bluffing. No one plans for something like this. No one expects their new family to be serial killers. I finished. You're right. Most people don't expect that. But most people haven't lived the life I have. The truth was, I had learned early to be suspicious of everyone, to always have an exit strategy, to never fully trust anyone. Growing up in foster care had taught me that families could be dangerous, that charming people often had the darkest secrets. My isolation wasn't weakness, it was armor. Dorothy raised the cattle prod, electricity arcing between its prongs. Recording. Or no recording, you're not leaving this basement alive. Do you understand me, girl? This family has too much to lose. And I have too much to live for, I replied, backing closer to the window. That's when I heard it, the sound of gravel crunching under tires in the driveway. Dorothy heard it too, her eyes widening as headlights swept across the basement's small windows. Who could that be? Marcus whispered. I smiled, feeling a surge of hope I'd almost given up on. My backup plan. It wasn't Sarah, she was still in Europe. But I had made one phone call before coming to the Morrison house, a call I hadn't mentioned. To Marcus. I'd contacted Dr. Rebecca Chen, a therapist I'd seen during my transition out of foster care, and told her about my unease regarding the Morrison family traditions. I'd asked her to check on me if she didn't hear from me by 11 p.m. Dr. Chen was notorious for following up on her concerns about patient safety, and she had connections with local law enforcement through her work with abuse survivors. The car doors slammed outside, followed by voices, multiple voices, including one that was unmistakably authoritative. Police, someone called from upstairs. We're responding to a wellness check. Is everyone all right in there? Dorothy's face went through a series of emotions, rage, fear, calculation, and finally a cold determination that terrified me more than her earlier anger. Marcus, she said quietly, get the cleaning supplies from the storage room. We need to sanitize this area immediately. Mom, there are police upstairs, and there's 43 bodies worth of evidence down here. Dorothy hissed. Do you want to spend the rest of your life in prison? Move. But Marcus was staring at me with something that might have been remorse. Elena, I'm sorry. This isn't how I wanted things to go. Then help me, I pleaded. Marcus, you can still do the right thing. Help me get out of here. Dorothy swung the cattle prod toward him in warning. Marcus, remember what happened to your father when he got sentimental about the Peterson girl. Remember what I had to do. The color drained from Marcus's face. You said Dad died of a heart attack. Your father died because he threatened to expose our work. Just like Elena is threatening us now. Dorothy's voice was ice cold. Blood is thicker than water, Marcus, but survival is thicker than blood. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. His mother hadn't just killed 43 innocent women, she'd killed his own father to protect her secrets. Sir? Ma'am? The voice from upstairs was getting louder, more insistent. We need to verify everyone's welfare. Please respond. Dorothy turned to me with renewed fury. This is your fault. All of it. If you had just drunk the tea like a good girl, none of this would be happening. She lunged forward with the cattle prod, but Marcus surprised us both by stepping between us. No, Mom. Not her. Get out of my way, Marcus. I said no. His voice cracked with emotion. Elena, go. Get out of here. Now. I didn't need to be told twice. I spun around and dove through the broken window, feeling the rough would tear at my dress and skin. Behind me, I heard Dorothy scream in rage and the awful sound of electricity. Discharging, Marcus cried out in pain. I hit the ground outside, rolling across Dorothy's perfect roses, thorns adding new cuts to my collection. Above me, I could see police flashlights moving through the house's windows. I struggled to my feet, my wedding dress now torn and bloody, and ran toward the front of the house. Help! I screamed as loud as I could. Help! In the basement. Murder! 2. Police officers rounded the corner of the house, their flashlights finding me immediately. Behind them came Dr. Chen, her face tight with concern. Elena. Thank God. Are you hurt? I collapsed to my knees on the perfectly manicured lawn, adrenaline finally giving way to shock. The basement, I gasped. Dorothy Morrison. She's killed 43 women. There are photographs. Evidence. Marcus is down there, she might hurt him too. The officers immediately radioed for backup and EMTs while one of them approached me. With professional calm. Ma'am, you're safe now. Can you tell us exactly what happened? As I began to tell my story, I heard sounds from the basement, shouting, crashing, what might have been gunshots. Or maybe it was just Dorothy's cattle prod. Discharging again. Dr. Chen knelt beside me, her hand gentle on my shoulder. Elena, you did the right thing calling me. I knew something felt wrong about this family when you described them. I pulled the photographs from my dress pocket, the evidence I'd managed to save. These women, I whispered. They all trusted the Morrisons. They all thought they were joining a loving family. More police cars were arriving now, their red and blue lights painting the Morrison house in colors of judgment and justice. Crime scene investigators would soon discover whatever horrors lay hidden in that basement, and the truth about the Morrison family tradition would finally come to light. But as I sat there in my ruined wedding dress, holding photographs of 43 murdered women, I couldn't help but think about Marcus's final act of defiance. Despite everything, despite being raised in that house of horrors, he had chosen to protect me in the end. I just hoped he was still alive to face the consequences of that choice. The EMTs arrived and began checking my injuries while police officers secured the scene. As they led me toward the ambulance, I took one last look at the Morrison house, that perfect suburban facade that had hidden such monstrous secrets. Tomorrow, the whole world would know the truth about the Morrison family tradition. Tonight, I was just grateful to be alive to tell it. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and broken dreams. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, watching the sunrise paint Portland's skyline in shades of pink and gold. 12 hours ago, I'd been a newlywed. Now I was a widow and the key witness in what Detective Sarah Hawkins was calling the most extensive serial murder case in Oregon's history. Detective Hawkins entered the room carrying a thick manila folder and wearing the expression of someone who hadn't slept in days. Behind her followed a woman I didn't recognize, tall, severe, with the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. Elena, this is Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI, Detective Hawkins said, settling into the plastic chair beside my bed. The Morrison case has been elevated to federal status due to the scope and duration of the crimes. Agent Torres remained standing, her posture military straight. Mrs. Morrison, excuse me, Ms. Vasquez, I know this is difficult, but we need to discuss some concerning developments in the investigation. I looked between them, noting the tension in their voices. What kind of developments? Detective Hawkins opened her folder, revealing crime scene photographs that made my stomach lurch. We've completed the initial search of the Morrison property. The basement was just the beginning. The photographs showed the backyard garden Dorothy had been so proud of, now excavated into a grid of rectangular holes. In several of those holes, white-clad figures worked with delicate precision, uncovering what looked like fragments of bone and fabric. How many? I whispered. 47 confirmed so far, Agent Torres said. The photographs you recovered only represented the women from the last 15 years. Mrs. Morrison's collection goes back much further. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. The scope of Dorothy's crimes was expanding beyond my worst nightmares. What about Marcus? Is he? Detective Hawkins's expression softened slightly. He's alive. Critical condition, but stable. The cattle prod caused significant electrical burns and cardiac irregularities. He's been asking for you. I don't want to see him. That's understandable, Agent Torres said. But we need you to understand something important. Based on our initial interviews with Mr. Morrison and evidence we've uncovered, we believe this conspiracy extends beyond the immediate family. She pulled out another set of photographs, these showing official documents, marriage certificates, death certificates, insurance policies. The Morrison family has been systematically murdering women for over 60 years. That requires more than just Dorothy and her husband. It requires accomplices in the insurance industry, law enforcement, the medical examiner's office, possibly even the local government. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You're saying there are other people involved. People who are still out there. We're certain of it, Detective Hawkins confirmed. The death certificates for these women all bear the signature of the same medical examiner, Dr. William Hartwell. He retired last year, but he was the one who ruled all these deaths as accidents or natural causes. Agent Torres added, the insurance payouts were processed by Morrison Family Insurance, a company owned by Dorothy's brother-in-law. The same man who served as mayor of this town for 12 years. I felt the walls of the hospital room closing in around me. So the entire system was corrupted. Police, medical examiners, insurance companies, local government, all of them working together to cover up mass murder. Not all of them, Detective Hawkins said quickly. But enough to create a network of protection around the Morrison family. And Elena, there's something else you need to know. She pulled out a photograph that made my blood freeze. It was me, taken with a telephoto lens, walking to my car after work. The date stamp showed it was taken 6 months before I'd ever met Marcus. They didn't meet you by accident, Agent Torres explained. The Morrison family had been surveilling you for months before Marcus made contact. We found a detailed dossier on you in Dorothy's safe, financial records, employment history, psychological profile, even genetic information. Genetic information? They wanted to ensure their victims met certain criteria, Detective Hawkins said grimly. Blood type, potential for offspring, absence of hereditary diseases. Elena, they weren't just choosing random women. They were selecting breeding stock. The coffee cup slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the linoleum floor. Breeding stock? Agent Torres sat down across from me, her expression gentler now. We found evidence that some of the women survived longer than others. Medical equipment in the basement suggests Dorothy was conducting experiments, attempting to force pregnancies, monitoring fetal development. We believe she was trying to create what she considered the perfect Morrison heir. I doubled over, retching into the small trash can beside the bed. The violation felt complete now. They hadn't just wanted to kill me, they'd wanted to use my body as an incubator for their twisted family line. There's more, Detective Hawkins said quietly. Marcus's blood work came back with some unusual results. We believe Dorothy was drugging him too, long-term administration of psychoactive medications designed to increase compliance and reduce moral inhibitions. I looked up from the trash can, wiping my mouth with a tissue. You're saying he's a victim too? To some extent, yes. Though that doesn't absolve him of responsibility for his actions, Agent Torres clarified. We believe Dorothy began medicating him in childhood, after his father's death. Chemical manipulation combined with psychological conditioning. A knock at the door interrupted us. A nurse entered, followed by a man I'd never seen before, middle-aged, wearing an expensive suit that screamed federal government. Ms. Vasquez, I'm Deputy Director Alan Crawford from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, he said, extending his hand. I need to speak with you about witness protection. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Witness protection? Detective Hawkins shifted uncomfortably. Elena, the people involved in this conspiracy have significant resources and reach. Your testimony is crucial to bringing them to justice, but it also makes you a target. Deputy Director Crawford opened his briefcase, revealing official documents and photographs of safe houses. We've identified at least 12 individuals in positions of authority who were complicit in the Morrison family's crimes. Some of them have already been arrested, but others have resources that extend beyond Oregon's borders. Including Dorothy's brother-in-law, the former mayor, Agent Torres added. Charles Morrison has connections throughout the Pacific Northwest. His insurance company has offices in 7 states, and he's been moving money offshore since Dorothy's arrest. I stared at the witness protection paperwork, realizing that surviving the Morrison basement was only the beginning of my nightmare. What would that mean? New identity? Relocation? Complete identity reconstruction, Deputy Director Crawford confirmed. New name, new background, relocation to another region. You'd have to cut all ties with your current life, job, friends, any remaining family connections. It was almost funny, in a sick way. The Morrison family had chosen me specifically because I had so few ties to cut. No parents, no siblings, minimal social connections. They'd selected the perfect victim, and now those same characteristics that made me vulnerable to them would make witness protection easier to implement. What about Marcus? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Mr. Morrison will likely spend the rest of his life in federal prison, Agent Torres said. Even with the mitigating circumstances of psychological manipulation and coercion, he was complicit in multiple murders. His cooperation with our investigation may reduce his sentence, but he'll never be free. Detective Hawkins leaned forward. Elena, there's something else. During Marcus's interview, he revealed that you weren't the first woman he was supposed to marry. There was another woman, 3 years ago, Jennifer Walsh. Marcus says he couldn't go through with it, and Jennifer disappeared before the wedding. You think Dorothy killed her anyway? We don't know. Jennifer Walsh's body hasn't been found on the Morrison property, and there's no death certificate on file. She simply vanished. It's possible she escaped, like you did. Agent Torres pulled out another photograph, a young woman. With dark hair and kind eyes, smiling at the camera. If Jennifer Walsh is alive, she might be hiding under an assumed identity. Your case might encourage her to come forward. I studied Jennifer's photograph, wondering if she was out there somewhere, living under a false name, always looking over her shoulder. Was that going to be my future? Years of paranoia and isolation, jumping at every unexpected sound? How long would I have to stay in protection? I asked. Deputy Director Crawford's expression was grim. These cases can take years to fully prosecute. Between the initial arrests, trials, appeals, and the potential for retaliation from other family members or associates, you might be looking at a decade or more. A decade. 10 years of my life, hidden away from the world, living as someone else. The Morrison family's reach would extend far beyond Dorothy's death or Marcus's imprisonment. Speaking of other family members, Detective Hawkins said, consulting her notes, we've discovered that Dorothy Morrison had 2 other children who died in infancy. But we've also found evidence of extended family members, cousins, nephews, in-laws, who may have been aware of the family business. There's a Morrison family reunion scheduled for next month, Agent Torres added. 43 family members from across the country. We're working on identifying each of them and determining their level of involvement. The scope kept expanding. What had started as Dorothy and Marcus's twisted tradition was revealing itself as a multi-generational, multi-state criminal enterprise. I need some air, I said, standing up too quickly and swaying on my feet. Detective Hawkins reached out to steady me. Elena, I know this is overwhelming. But you should know, your courage last night saved lives. If you hadn't fought back, if you hadn't gathered evidence, Dorothy Morrison would have continued killing. And, Agent Torres added, your testimony might be the key to saving Jennifer Walsh, if she's still alive, and preventing future victims. I walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd lived for the past 5 years. Somewhere out there, Jennifer Walsh might be watching the news coverage of the Morrison arrests, wondering if it was finally safe to come home. Somewhere out there, other potential victims were going about their lives, unaware that they might have been marked for death by a family of predators. If I go into witness protection, I said without turning around, what happens to my life? Here? My job, my apartment, everything I've built? It would all have to be abandoned, Deputy Director Crawford said gently. I won't lie to you, witness protection is essentially a form of voluntary death and rebirth. Elena Vasquez would cease to exist, and someone entirely new would take her place. I thought about my small apartment with its carefully chosen furniture. My job at the nonprofit where I helped other survivors of trauma, my evening walks through the neighborhood where I'd finally felt safe. All of it would have to be sacrificed to ensure justice for 47 murdered women. There is another option, Agent Torres said carefully. You could testify and remain in your current identity, but with enhanced security measures. It's riskier, but it would allow you to keep your life. How much riskier? Significantly. The Morrison network has resources we're still uncovering. Charles Morrison alone has enough money to hire professional killers. And there may be family members we haven't identified yet who might seek revenge for Dorothy's arrest. I pressed my forehead against the cool window glass, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. Disappear completely and live as a ghost of myself, or stay and risk becoming the Morrison family's next victim. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course, Deputy Director Crawford replied. But Elena, we can't keep you safe indefinitely. Without a decision. The longer you remain visible, the greater the risk becomes. As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Dorothy sends her regards. We know where you are. The room fell silent as Detective Hawkins read the message over my shoulder. Agent Torres was already on her radio, calling for additional security. Well, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I guess that makes the decision easier. Outside the window, Portland's morning traffic moved in predictable patterns, people heading to jobs and lives they took for granted. Soon, I would have to choose between joining them in their normalcy or disappearing into the shadows to ensure their safety. Either way, Elena Vasquez's story was coming to an end. The question was whether she would get to write the final chapter herself. The safe house was a nondescript ranch home in suburban Sacramento, complete with beige siding and a mailbox that read, Johnson. For the past 2 weeks, I'd been Sarah Johnson, mousy accountant, no family, no history worth investigating. The FBI had done their work well, creating a paper trail that would satisfy casual scrutiny while they built their case against the Morrison network. I was washing dishes when Agent Torres knocked on the kitchen window, her face grim with urgency. Something had changed. Elena, she said as I let her in through the back door, we need to talk. There's been a development. I dried my hands on a dish towel that belonged to my fictional life. Good news or bad news? That depends on your perspective. She set her briefcase on the kitchen table and pulled out a laptop. We found Jennifer Walsh. My heart jumped. Is she alive? Very much so. And she's been asking to speak with you. Agent Torres opened the laptop, revealing a video call interface. On the screen sat a woman I recognized from the photographs, Jennifer Walsh, but different. Older, harder, with the kind of alertness that came from years of looking over your shoulder. Elena? Jennifer's voice came through the speakers, tinged with an accent I couldn't place. God, I can't believe you survived. When I saw the news about Dorothy's arrest, I thought. I hoped maybe someone had finally fought back. Where are you? I asked, settling into the chair across from the laptop. Sarajevo, Jennifer replied. I've been living here for 3 years under the name Amara Kovac. Turns out Bosnia doesn't have extradition treaties with a lot of countries, and they're surprisingly welcoming to women fleeing domestic violence. Agent Torres leaned into the camera's view. Ms. Walsh, you told Agent Reynolds that you have information about the Morrison network that could change our entire investigation. Jennifer's expression darkened. I do. But first, Elena needs to understand something important. The Morrison family didn't choose you randomly. They didn't choose me randomly either. We were selected for a very specific reason, and it has nothing to do with what the FBI thinks. What do you mean? Jennifer disappeared from the screen for a moment, then returned carrying a thick folder. I've spent 3 years investigating the Morrison family from a distance. What I found will shock you. Elena, do you know anything about your biological parents? The question hit me like ice water. No. I was abandoned as an infant. Left at a hospital with no identification. Hospital St. Vincent in Portland. Yes, but how did you? Because I was abandoned at the same hospital. 6 months before you. Jennifer's voice was steady, but I could see tears in her eyes. Elena, we're not random victims. We're sisters. The world tilted sideways. Agent Torres grabbed my arm as I swayed in my chair. That's impossible. Is it? Jennifer opened her folder, revealing documents I'd never seen before. Birth records. From St. Vincent. DNA analysis I had done in Europe. Elena, we have the same mother. On screen, she held up a birth certificate. Even through the video call, I could make out the maternal signature, a name that meant nothing to me but everything to Jennifer's expression. Our mother's name was Maria Santos. She was 17 when she had me, 18 when she had you. And Elena. Jennifer's voice broke slightly. She didn't abandon us by choice. She was murdered by the Morrison family. Agent Torres was frantically taking notes. Ms. Walsh, these are serious allegations. Do you have proof? I have more than proof. I have the why. Jennifer pulled out another document, a faded newspaper clipping. Maria Santos was Dorothy Morrison's half-sister. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. What? Dorothy's father had an affair when Dorothy was 12. Maria was the result. Dorothy spent her entire life feeling displaced by her younger, prettier half-sister. When Maria got pregnant at 17, Dorothy saw an opportunity for revenge. Jennifer's face filled the screen as she leaned closer to her camera. Maria's first baby, me, was supposed to be adopted by a nice family in California. Instead, Dorothy intercepted the adoption paperwork and placed me in foster care under a false identity. When Maria had her second baby, Dorothy did the same thing. Agent Torres was typing rapidly on her phone, probably verifying Jennifer's claims in real time. What happened to Maria Santos? According to the records I found, she died in a car accident 2 weeks after Elena's birth. But I tracked down the investigating officer. He's retired now, living in Florida. After a few drinks, he admitted the accident scene never made sense. Single car crash on a straight road, no skid marks, no mechanical failure. I felt sick. Dorothy killed our mother. And then spent the next 25 years tracking her daughters, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy us too. Jennifer's voice was cold with rage. This was never about random victims or breeding programs. This was Dorothy's ultimate revenge against her half-sister, killing Maria's children in the most personal way possible. Agent Torres looked up from her phone. Elena, we're running emergency DNA tests to verify this information. If Ms. Walsh is correct, it changes everything. About the Morrison investigation. How does it change anything? I asked, my mind reeling. Dorothy is still a serial killer. The other victims are still dead. Because, Jennifer said, if we're Dorothy's nieces, then we have legal standing to challenge the Morrison family trust. Elena, the Morrison fortune is worth over $50 million. Money that should have gone to our mother, and by extension, to us. The implications were staggering. You're saying this entire conspiracy was built around stealing an inheritance? Partially. Dorothy's father left everything to his legitimate daughter, but with a provision: if Dorothy died without an heir, the estate would pass to Maria Santos's children. Jennifer's smile was sharp as a blade. Dorothy spent decades killing to protect her secret, but she also spent decades making sure we'd never be in a position to claim what was legally ours. Agent Torres was getting more animated as she processed the information. This explains the genetic testing, the detailed background checks, the careful selection process. The Morrison family wasn't just choosing victims, they were hunting specific targets. There's more, Jennifer continued. I found records of other children born to Morrison family members over the past 60 years. Babies who were quietly given up for adoption, placed in foster care, or simply disappeared. Elena, we might not be the only ones. She pulled out a list of names, dates, and locations. I've identified at least 7 other potential siblings or cousins who were separated from their families and placed in vulnerable situations. The Morrison network has been systematically destroying their own bloodline to maintain power. I stared at the list, trying to process the magnitude of what Jennifer was revealing. So the Morrison family murders weren't just about silencing witnesses or collecting insurance money. They were about eliminating anyone with a legitimate claim to the family fortune. Exactly. And Elena, there's something else you need to know. Jennifer's expression grew even more serious. I didn't escape the Morrison family 3 years ago. I was rescued. Rescued by whom? By other survivors. Elena, there's an entire network of people who've been tracking the Morrison family for decades. Former victims who escaped, relatives of murdered women, even some law enforcement officers who suspected corruption but couldn't prove it. Agent Torres leaned forward. Are you saying there's been a counter-conspiracy operating parallel to our investigation? I'm saying you're not the first federal agents to investigate the Morrison family. There was another investigation 15 years ago that was quietly shut down. The lead investigator, Agent Michael Chen, was transferred to Alaska and told to forget everything he'd learned. Jennifer disappeared from the screen again, returning with a photograph of a man in his 50s. Agent Chen spent the rest of his career building a private network of Morrison survivors and allies. When I escaped 3 years ago, his people found me and brought me into the fold. Where is Agent Chen now? I asked. He died last year. Cancer. But his network is still active, and they've been waiting for an opportunity like this, a survivor who lived long enough to expose the truth and a federal investigation with enough resources to see it through. Agent Torres's phone buzzed with a message. She read it, her face paling. Elena, the DNA results are back. Jennifer Walsh is telling the truth. Your sisters. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. Jennifer, this woman I'd never met, was family. Real family. The sister I'd never known I had. There's something else, Agent Torres continued, reading from her phone. We've verified several of the names on Jennifer's list. 3 of them died in suspicious circumstances over the past decade. 2 others are missing persons cases that were never properly investigated. Jennifer nodded grimly. The Morrison family has been playing a long game, Elena. Decades of planning to eliminate every potential heir to the family fortune. We were supposed to be the final pieces of the puzzle. But Dorothy's been arrested. The conspiracy is exposed. Isn't it over? Dorothy was just the visible head of the operation, Jennifer replied. The real power in the Morrison family is Charles Morrison, Dorothy's brother-in-law and our mother's half-nephew. He's been orchestrating this from behind the scenes for years. Agent Torres was typing frantically again. We arrested Charles Morrison last week on insurance fraud charges. He's in federal custody. You arrested a decoy. Jennifer's voice was flat. The man you think is Charles Morrison is actually his younger brother, Thomas. The real Charles Morrison has been living under an assumed identity in Switzerland for the past 5 years, managing the family's offshore accounts. The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Agent Torres was already on her radio, calling for emergency verification of their prisoner's identity. How do you know all this? I asked. Because Agent Chen's network has been tracking the real Charles Morrison for years. Elena, the Morrison family corruption goes deeper than the FBI realizes. It involves multiple federal agencies, international banking, and enough money to buy silence at the highest levels of government. Jennifer leaned closer to her camera. Elena, you need to understand something. The text message you received at the hospital, Dorothy sends her regards, it didn't come from a random family member seeking revenge. It came from Charles Morrison himself. From Switzerland? From Portland. Elena, Charles Morrison is back in the United States. And according to our intelligence, he's not just coming for you. He's coming for everyone who knows the truth about the Morrison family fortune. Agent Torres ended her radio call, her face grave. Elena, we need to move you immediately. The man we've been holding isn't Charles Morrison, and we have no idea where the real one is. Jennifer's voice came through the speakers with urgent clarity. Elena, I'm flying back to the United States tonight. Agent Chen's network has a safe location where we can meet in person. But you need to understand, this is bigger than witness protection or federal prosecution. This is about survival. I looked between the laptop screen showing my sister's face and Agent Torres's expression of professional alarm. In the span of an hour, everything I thought I knew about my life had been turned upside down. I wasn't just a random victim who'd escaped a serial killer. I was part of a generational conspiracy involving millions of dollars, international crime networks, and family secrets that stretched back decades. Jennifer, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, what do you need me to do? Her smile was fierce. With determination. I need you to help me finish what our mother couldn't. I need you to help me destroy the Morrison family once and for all. Outside the safe house, I could hear the sound of multiple vehicles approaching. Agent Torres was at the window, her hand on her weapon. Elena, she said urgently, we have company. And they're not federal agents. Jennifer's voice came through the laptop speakers one last time. Elena, whatever happens in the next few minutes, remember this, you're not alone anymore. You have family now. And we take care of each other. The sound of footsteps on the front porch made Agent Torres motion for silence. Through the kitchen window, I could see men in dark suits surrounding the house. They moved with military precision, and none of them were wearing the identifying gear of law enforcement. Charles Morrison had found me. Agent Torres killed the laptop connection and drew her weapon in one fluid motion. Kitchen pantry, she whispered. Urgently. There's a hidden panel that leads to the garage. Go. Now. But I couldn't move. Something about the approaching footsteps felt wrong, too measured, too confident. They knew exactly where to find me, I whispered back. How is that possible? Torres's face went white as realization hit her. The safe house location. Only 5 people knew where you were. The implications crashed over us both simultaneously. Someone in the FBI's inner circle was feeding information to Charles Morrison. Someone who had access to witness protection protocols, safe house locations, and communication logs. A voice called out from the front porch, cultured, calm, with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Elena Santos, my dear niece. I believe it's time we had a family reunion. Santos. He'd used my mother's name, the name I'd never known I had a right to carry. We can discuss this like civilized people, Charles Morrison continued, or we can do this the difficult way. Either option will end with the same result, but one involves significantly less unpleasantness for everyone involved. Agent Torres was speaking rapidly into her radio, but getting only static in response. Communications are jammed, she muttered. Professional-grade equipment. I moved to the kitchen window, staying low, and peered through the blinds. 6 men in dark suits had surrounded the house, but they weren't behaving like typical mercenaries. Their posture was too relaxed, their positioning too casual. They looked like bodyguards more than assassins. Elena, Charles Morrison's voice came again, I know you're listening. I also know that Agent Torres is with you, along with whatever recording equipment the FBI thought would be sufficient to document our conversation. My blood ran cold. He knew exactly who was in the house. I'm going to walk up to the front door now, he continued conversationally. I'm unarmed, and I'm alone. I simply want to talk. You have my word that no harm will come to either of you during our conversation. Agent Torres shook her head vigorously. Don't trust him. Elena, we need to get you out of here. But something in Charles Morrison's tone nagged at me. The confidence was real, but underneath it was something else, fatigue, maybe even grief. This wasn't the voice of a man coming to eliminate a threat. This was the voice of someone who was tired of running. Agent Torres, Charles Morrison called out, apparently having heard our whispered conversation, I believe your backup is currently dealing with some traffic delays. Interstate 80 has been closed due to a rather convenient chemical spill. Your colleagues won't be arriving for at least 2 hours. He had resources that extended far beyond hired killers. The ability to stage chemical spills, jam federal communications, and track FBI safe houses suggested corruption at levels I hadn't imagined possible. However, his voice continued, I've taken the liberty of inviting some additional guests to our family gathering. The sound of approaching vehicles made Agent Torres curse under her breath. Through the window, I watched as 3 black SUVs pulled up to the house. From the first vehicle, Jennifer emerged, followed by 2 men I didn't recognize. From the second, 4 people and FBI windbreakers stepped out, but these agents moved with the same casual confidence as Charles Morrison's men. Elena, Jennifer's voice called out, it's safe. Charles isn't here to hurt us. Agent Torres looked at me with growing alarm. Elena, don't listen to them. This could be a coordinated deception. Your sister could be under duress. But something in Jennifer's tone carried the same unusual quality I'd heard in Charles Morrison's voice. Not fear or coercion, but something I couldn't quite identify. I'm going out there, I said, surprising myself with the decision. Elena, no. That's exactly what they want. Then why haven't they just broken down the door? I asked. Torres, think about it. If Charles Morrison wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. He has the resources to level this entire block if he wanted to. I stood up, smoothing down the jeans and sweater that had become my uniform in witness protection. Charles Morrison, I called out, I'm coming to the front door. Excellent, he replied. Please bring Agent Torres with you. She's going to want to hear this conversation. The front door of the safe house opened to reveal a scene that defied all my expectations. Charles Morrison stood on the porch, a tall, distinguished man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that looked remarkably like my own. Behind him, Jennifer waited with an expression that mixed relief and apprehension, but it was the third person who shocked me most, Dr. Rebecca Chen, the therapist who had initiated the wellness check that saved my life, stood beside Jennifer, with the bearing of someone in charge. Elena, Dr. Chen said gently, there are some things about your rescue that weren't entirely coincidental. Agent Torres kept her weapon drawn but lowered. Dr. Chen? What are you doing here? Dr. Chen is Agent Michael Chen's daughter, Charles Morrison explained. She's been part of the Survivor Network for 15 years, specializing in psychological support for Morrison family victims. The pieces began clicking into place. You've been watching me since I started therapy with you. Since before that, actually, Dr. Chen admitted. We identified you as a potential Morrison target 3 years ago. When you started dating Marcus, we knew it was only a matter of time before they made their move. Jennifer stepped forward, her eyes locked on mine. Elena, we couldn't intervene directly without exposing the entire network. But we could position people to help when the time came. The wellness check, I realized. You knew I'd contact Dr. Chen if I felt threatened. We hoped you would, Charles Morrison said. It was our backup plan if you didn't manage to escape on your own. Agent Torres finally holstered her weapon, but her confusion was evident. I don't understand. Mr. Morrison, you're wanted by the FBI for conspiracy and murder. Why are you turning yourself in? Charles Morrison's laugh was bitter. Agent Torres, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about my role in the Morrison family business. He gestured to the group around him. May we sit down? This conversation is going to take some time, and it involves information that will change your entire understanding of this case. 10 minutes later, we were gathered in the safe house's living room, the same room where I'd spent 2 weeks hiding from the Morrison conspiracy. Now, surrounded by the very people I'd been hiding from, the irony wasn't lost on me. Charles Morrison sat across from me, his hands folded in his lap. Elena, I need you to understand something about your mother. Maria Santos wasn't just Dorothy's half-sister. She was my first love, and the reason I've spent the last 30 years trying to destroy the Morrison family from within. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. You loved our mother? I was 22 when I met Maria. She was 18, pregnant with Jennifer, and terrified. Dorothy had already intercepted the adoption papers and was threatening to take the baby away entirely. His voice carried decades of pain. I tried to help her, but I was young and naive. I didn't understand the extent of Dorothy's resources or her willingness to kill to protect her secrets. Jennifer leaned forward. Charles has been fighting the Morrison family longer than anyone. When our mother was murdered, he began documenting Dorothy's crimes, building evidence, positioning himself to eventually bring her down. But why not go to the police? Agent Torres asked. Because the police were compromised, Dr. Chen explained. My father tried that approach 15 years ago. His investigation was shut down, his evidence confiscated, and he was transferred to Alaska with threats against his family if he ever spoke about what he discovered. Charles Morrison nodded grimly. The Morrison corruption extended into federal law enforcement, state government, and international banking. Any direct assault on the family would have failed, and more innocent people would have died. So you created the Survivor Network, I said, beginning to understand. We created a parallel investigation, he corrected. Over the past 20 years, we've documented every Morrison crime, identified every corrupt official, and traced every dollar of stolen money. We've been waiting for the right moment to strike. Jennifer pulled out a tablet, swiping through files. That made my head spin. Elena, the evidence we've gathered goes far beyond Dorothy's basement murders. We have documentation of government contract fraud, international money laundering, human trafficking, and political assassination. Political assassination? 3 state senators, 2 federal judges, and a U.S. attorney who got too close to Morrison operations, Charles Morrison said flatly. All ruled natural deaths or accidents, all investigated by Morrison-controlled medical examiners and law enforcement. Agent Torres was taking rapid notes. This is the largest criminal conspiracy in U.S. history. And it would have continued indefinitely if Elena hadn't fought back, Dr. Chen said. Your escape from the Morrison basement was the catalyst we needed to launch the final phase of our operation. I looked around the room at these people who had been protecting me without my knowledge, fighting battles I didn't even know existed. What is the final phase? Charles Morrison's smile was sharp as a blade. Tomorrow morning, every major news network in the country will receive copies of our complete evidence files. Simultaneously, we'll be filing criminal complaints in 7 states and 3 countries. The Morrison network will be exposed completely. But more importantly, Jennifer added, we'll be filing civil suits to recover the stolen Morrison fortune. Elena, as Maria Santos's daughters, we're the rightful heirs to everything Dorothy and her family stole. The magnitude of what they were proposing was staggering. You're going to destroy the entire Morrison network in one coordinated attack. We're going to finish what your mother started when she tried to protect her children, Charles Morrison said. Maria never got the chance to claim her inheritance or expose Dorothy's crimes. But her daughters will. Agent Torres looked up from her notes. What about the federal investigation? The FBI has been building its own case. The FBI investigation will proceed, Dr. Chen assured her. But it will be supported by 30 years of additional evidence that the Bureau never had access to. Your prosecution will be airtight. Charles Morrison stood up, walking to the window. There's something else you need to know, Elena. The man the FBI arrested, Thomas Morrison, Dorothy's actual brother-in-law, he's not just a decoy. He's been cooperating with our network for 5 years. Thomas Morrison has been feeding information to the Survivor network, Jennifer explained. He was forced into the family business after Dorothy murdered his wife for asking too many questions about the insurance payouts. The layers of deception and counter-deception were making my head spin. So the Morrison family was being investigated by the FBI, infiltrated by their own relatives, and hunted by a secret network of survivors all at the same time. Dorothy never suspected, Charles Morrison said with satisfaction. She was so focused on eliminating potential heirs that she never noticed the walls closing in around her. Agent Torres's radio crackled to life. The jamming had apparently been lifted. Agent Torres, this is Command. What's your status? She looked around the room at the unlikely gathering of law enforcement, survivors, and reformed criminals. Command, I'm going to need a much larger debriefing room. Dr. Chen smiled. Agent Torres, you might want to clear your schedule for the next few weeks. We have quite a lot to discuss. But I was focused on Charles Morrison, this man who had loved my mother and spent decades seeking justice for her murder. Charles, what happens after tomorrow? When all this evidence comes out and the Morrison network is destroyed? His expression softened as he looked at me. Elena, you and Jennifer will finally be free to live the lives your mother wanted for you. You'll have the resources to do whatever you choose, and you'll never have to look over your shoulders again. Jennifer reached across the space between us and took my hand. We'll have each other. For the first time in our lives, we'll have real family. The emotion hit me without warning, grief for the mother I'd never known, rage at the decades of manipulation and murder, relief at finally understanding my place in the world, and hope for a future I'd never dared to imagine. There's one more thing, Charles Morrison said gently. Elena, your mother left something for you and Jennifer. Something Dorothy never found. He pulled out a small jewelry box, its surface worn smooth with age. Maria gave this to me the day before she died. She made me promise to give it to her daughters when they were old enough to understand. Inside the box were 2 identical lockets, each containing a photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Our mother. She wanted you to know that everything she did, giving you up, trying to protect you, was because she loved you, Charles Morrison said, his voice thick with emotion. She wanted you to have the chance at life that the Morrison family tried to steal from her. I held the locket, feeling the weight of a mother's love I'd never known I possessed. Beside me, Jennifer was crying openly, clutching her own locket like a lifeline. Tomorrow, the Morrison family empire would fall. Justice would finally be served for 47 murdered women and countless other victims. But tonight, in this safe house that had become the center of our revolution, 2 sisters had finally found each other and the family they'd always deserved. Elena, Jennifer said through her tears, are you ready to finish this? I looked around the room at the people who had risked everything to protect me, who had spent decades building a case for justice, who had given me back my name and my family and my future. Yes, I said, my voice strong with newfound purpose. Let's end the Morrison family once and for all. 1 year later, the Portland courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, their cameras flashing like strobe lights against the gray October sky. I stood between Jennifer and Charles Morrison, watching as the last of the Morrison family defendants were led away in handcuffs. Dorothy Morrison herself had died in federal custody 6 months ago, a heart attack brought on by the stress of watching her empire crumble. Even in death, she'd managed to escape full accountability for her crimes, but justice had prevailed in every other way that mattered. Elena Santos, a reporter, called out, how does it feel to see the final convictions in what prosecutors are calling the largest criminal conspiracy in Oregon history? I adjusted the microphone that had been thrust in my direction, feeling the weight of my mother's locket beneath my blouse. A year ago, I wouldn't have had the courage to speak publicly about any of this. Now, I had a responsibility to the 47 women who couldn't speak for themselves. It feels like closure, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the courthouse plaza. For my sister and me, for the families of Dorothy Morrison's victims, and for everyone who suffered under this conspiracy of silence. Today, we know that truth and justice can prevail, even against the most powerful criminals. The questions came in a rapid-fire succession that I'd grown accustomed to over the past year. How had we uncovered the full scope of the Morrison network? What was it like to discover I had a sister? What were our plans for the recovered Morrison fortune? Jennifer stepped up to the microphone cluster. Elena and I want to be clear about something. The Morrison Family Trust, which the courts have now awarded to us as the rightful heirs, will not be used for personal gain. We're establishing the Maria Santos Foundation for Missing and Exploited Women. The foundation had been our idea, born out of late-night conversations in safe houses and hotel rooms as we'd worked with federal prosecutors to build their cases. We'd realized that Dorothy Morrison's victims represented only a fraction of the women who disappeared each year into systems of exploitation and violence. Our mother's legacy would be about protecting others from the fate she'd suffered. The foundation will provide resources for missing persons investigations, support for survivors of family-based violence, and funding for law enforcement training to identify and disrupt criminal networks like the Morrison conspiracy, I continued. We estimate we'll be able to help thousands of women over the next decade. Charles Morrison stepped forward, his own transformation over the past year evident in his relaxed posture and genuine smile. A year ago, he'd been a man carrying 30 years of guilt and rage. Now, he was free to grieve properly for my mother and build something positive from the ashes of his quest for justice. I'll be serving as the Foundation's chief investigator, he announced. Along with former FBI agent Sarah Torres and Dr. Rebecca Chen, we'll be working to identify other criminal networks that exploit vulnerable women and children. Agent Torres, now former Agent Torres, had resigned from the FBI after discovering the extent of corruption within her own agency. The Morrison investigation had revealed that 3 federal agents, 2 U.S. attorneys, and a federal judge had been on the Morrison payroll for years. She decided she could do more good working outside the system than trying to reform it from within. Dr. Chen had expanded her practice to focus specifically on survivors of family-based trauma, using techniques she'd developed while working with the Survivor Network. She'd also become something of a surrogate mother to Jennifer and me, helping us navigate the complex emotions of discovering family in our 30s. What about Marcus Morrison? Another reporter called out. Will you be attending his sentencing hearing next week? The question I'd been dreading. Marcus had pled guilty to conspiracy charges 6 months ago, accepting a 20-year sentence. In exchange for his cooperation in exposing the Morrison network's financial operations. The psychological evaluation had confirmed what we'd suspected. Years of chemical manipulation and psychological conditioning had severely impaired his moral reasoning, but that didn't erase his choices or the pain he'd caused. I will be attending, I said carefully. Not to support Marcus, but to represent his victims. The women he helped lure to their deaths deserved to have someone speak for them at his sentencing. It was a decision that had taken months of therapy to reach. Dr. Chen had helped me understand. That forgiveness wasn't about excusing Marcus's actions, but about freeing myself from the burden of hatred. I could acknowledge his victimization while still holding him accountable for his choices. Jennifer squeezed my hand, a gesture that had become natural over the past year as we'd learned to be sisters. We want to emphasize that Marcus Morrison was both a victim and a perpetrator. His case highlights the importance of early intervention in families where abuse and manipulation are present. The foundation would be funding research into the psychological conditioning techniques the Morrison family had used, hoping to help other victims of family-based coercion break free before they became perpetrators themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Morrison announced, this concludes our statement. We want to thank the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and all the law enforcement officers who worked tirelessly to bring justice to Dorothy Morrison's victims. As the crowd of reporters began to disperse, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Turning, I found Agent Reynolds, one of the few federal agents who had emerged from the Morrison investigation with his reputation intact. He'd been promoted to head the FBI's new task force on family-based criminal enterprises. Elena, Jennifer, he said warmly, I wanted to thank you personally. Your courage made all of this possible. The courage was always there, Jennifer replied. We just needed to find each other to use it effectively. It was true. Over the past year, as we'd worked together to untangle the Morrison conspiracy and build our new lives, Jennifer and I had discovered that we shared more than just genetics. We had the same stubborn determination, the same refusal to be silenced, the same fierce protective instincts that had helped us survive our separate childhoods in foster care. We'd also discovered differences that complemented each other perfectly. Jennifer's years of investigative work had given her a strategic mind and a network of contacts around the world. My background in social work had taught me how to build trust with traumatized individuals and navigate complex family dynamics. Together, we made a formidable team. Agent Reynolds, I said, what's the latest on the international aspects of the case? The Swiss authorities have been cooperative. Charles Morrison's financial records led us to Morrison accounts in 7 countries. We've recovered over $40 million so far, and we're still finding hidden assets. He paused, his expression growing more serious. We've also identified Morrison connections to human trafficking networks in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. The scope of Dorothy Morrison's empire had continued to expand even after her death. Each new revelation reinforced our decision to dedicate the recovered fortune to fighting similar criminal enterprises. There's something else, Agent Reynolds continued. We've identified 12 other women who were targeted by the Morrison family but managed to escape or avoid capture. Would you be interested in reaching out to them? Jennifer and I exchanged glances. We discussed this possibility, the idea of creating a true survivors network to replace the shadow organization that had operated in secret for so many years. Yes, I said without hesitation. They deserve to know they're not alone. As we walked away from the courthouse, leaving behind the media circus and the formal proceedings, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that terrible night in Dorothy Morrison's basement. A year ago, I'd been Elena Vasquez, isolated, vulnerable, trapped in a web of lies I hadn't even known existed. Now I was Elena Santos, connected, purposeful, surrounded by family both biological and chosen. I had a sister who understood me in ways no one else could, allies who had risked everything to protect me, and a mission that gave meaning to all the pain I'd endured. We drove through Portland in Jennifer's rental car. She'd decided to move back to the United States permanently, though she was keeping her apartment in Sarajevo as a retreat space. Charles Morrison sat in the passenger seat, pointing out landmarks from our mother's life that he'd spent decades researching. There's the coffee shop where Maria worked when she was pregnant with you, he said, indicating a small cafe in the Pearl District. She used to save every tip, hoping to build a college fund for her daughters. These glimpses into our mother's life had become precious gifts over the past year. Through Charles Morrison's memories, survivor network research, and recovered documents, we'd been able to piece together Maria Santos's short life, her dreams for her children, her struggle against poverty and family dysfunction, her desperate attempts to protect us from Dorothy Morrison's influence. She'd been braver than I'd ever imagined, and stronger than the Morrison family had given her credit for. Elena, Jennifer said, pulling into the parking lot of the Morrison house, now seized by the federal government and scheduled for demolition, are you ready for this? The house looked smaller than I remembered, its perfect suburban facade now broken by plywood windows and crime scene tape. In a few days, it would be razed to make room for a memorial garden honoring Dorothy Morrison's victims. Jennifer and I had insisted on being present for the demolition, but first, we had one final task to complete. We walked around to the backyard, where the excavation sites had been filled in and marked with temporary memorial stones. The FBI had recovered 47 bodies from the Morrison property, each one representing a life cut short, a family destroyed, a future stolen. I knelt beside the marker for Jane Doe No. 1, the oldest victim, whose body had been found in the deepest part of the garden. The forensic anthropologist estimated she'd been killed in the early 1960s, possibly one of Dorothy Morrison's first victims. We're going to remember all of you, I said quietly, placing a white rose beside the marker. Your names will be on the memorial wall at the foundation headquarters. Your stories will help protect other women. Jennifer placed her own rose beside mine. You're not forgotten anymore. Charles Morrison had brought roses for every marker, 47. White roses for 47 women whose lives had been stolen by his former sister-in-law. As he moved methodically through the garden, placing a flower beside each marker, I could see him saying something at each stop, perhaps an apology, perhaps a promise, Perhaps just acknowledgement of their humanity. The sun was setting by the time we finished our memorial ritual. As we walked back toward the car, I felt a sense of completion that had been elusive throughout the year of trials and revelations. "Elena," Jennifer said as we reached the street, "what do you think happens next?" I looked back at the Morrison house one final time, then at my sister, this remarkable woman who had survived 3 years in exile to help bring justice to our mother's killers. "We live," I said simply. "We build the foundation, we help other survivors, we honor our mother's memory. We become the family she always wanted us to be." The drive back to our hotel was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts about the journey that had brought us to this moment. Tomorrow, we would fly to San Francisco to begin setting up the Foundation's headquarters. Next week, we would attend Marcus Morrison's sentencing, representing the voices of his victims. Next month, we would break ground on the memorial garden that would replace the Morrison house, but tonight, we were just 3 people who had found each other in the wreckage of a decades-long conspiracy, bound together by loss and love and the determination to ensure that Dorothy Morrison's reign of terror would never be repeated. As I fell asleep that night in my hotel room, wearing my mother's locket and surrounded by the evidence of justice served, I thought about the young woman who had stood in a basement a year ago, terrified and alone, fighting for her life against impossible odds she could never have imagined. That her desperate fight for survival would lead to this, to family, to purpose, to a future built on the foundation of truth and justice that her mother had died trying to establish. Maria Santos's daughters had finally come home, the basement that was meant to be our tomb had become the birthplace of our freedom, and Dorothy Morrison's twisted family tradition had been replaced by a legacy of healing, protection, and love that would endure long after the last of her victims had been laid to rest. In the end, the strongest traditions are those built not on violence and fear, but on courage and compassion, and the Morrison family's greatest failure was underestimating the power of 2 sisters who refused to let their mother's death be in vain. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.